Today we're going to talk about a very unusual mystery. A highly regarded couple in a small town in Indiana was going through some tough times and would soon suffer a terrible tragedy. But what would happen 10 years later would leave everyone shocked. More than 40 years later, this case still leaves people scratching their heads. Let's talk about Clarence Roberts. Clarence Roberts was born in 1918 in Brown County, Indiana. At the age of 19, he would marry Velma Seats, but the marriage wouldn't last. 4 years later, in 1941, he would marry Geneva White, who came from a very poor family. The couple would go on to make a nice life for themselves in Nashville, Indiana, and would soon add sons Forrest, Bernard, Lauren, and Thomas to their young family. In the 1960s, Clarence and his brother Carson Roberts owned a prosperous hardware store. The brothers worked together running the store for 22 years. Carson said that Clarence always seemed happy, enjoyed the work, and always got along well with people. Clarence and Geneva Roberts were enjoying their new prosperous life and were highly respected in Nashville, Indiana society. Clarence had reached the 33rd degree of the Masons. Along with that accomplishment, he obtained a ring, which he wore proudly. Clarence's appetite for the finer things in this new prosperous life began to take over his life. He purchased 3 luxury cars and an expensive, lavish home. However, behind the seemingly affluent lifestyle of the Roberts were now crushing debts. Clarence's sister-in-law, Alberta Roberts, said that his personality changed greatly around this time. She described it as turning a light on and turning a light off. To try to fund his new expensive lifestyle, Clarence would sell his hardware business and invest in 2 properties, an apartment building and several grain elevators. However, these investments would fail. He submitted altered and/or fictitious bills to an insurance company regarding the apartment. Later in 1970, Clarence Roberts was in trouble. In October of 1970, Sheriff Warren Roberts, Clarence's own brother, would repossess 2 of Clarence and Geneva's vehicles. The Roberts were depressed and destitute. There were also concerns that Clarence was suicidal. Clarence Roberts' friend and former attorney, Florence Bradley, would recount her last meeting with him. He was crying and couldn't face his creditors, trying to borrow money to pay off his bills and big insurance premiums. He would say to Bradley, "I tell you, my wife will be the richest widow in Brown County." The Nashville Masonic Lodge even considered revoking Clarence's prized 33rd degree status. The thought of losing his rank and status in the lodge was devastating to Clarence, his friends would say. Then on the night of November 18, 1970, a fire was discovered at the Roberts property. Firemen soon arrived to find the garage barn fully engulfed. It was so intense that firefighters could do little but helplessly stand by while it burned to the ground. When the fire died out and was cooled down, an inspection was made. The firefighters would make a grisly discovery. In the middle of the debris, they found a body burned beyond recognition. It was burned so badly that it was even difficult to identify it as human. There was also a half-melted shotgun beside it. The county coroner, Jack Bond, knowing of Clarence Roberts' mounting debts, feared that he had taken his own life. With the gun by the body, they assumed that Clarence had shot himself before starting the fire. However, they could not find any gunshot wounds. Now they were curious as to how he could have ended his life and then set the fire. It was ultimately determined that the cause of death was carbon monoxide poisoning, and he had probably perished before the fire had consumed him. While sifting through the ashes, Detective Don Kuster would find Clarence Roberts' Masonic ring. Strangely, though, it was in excellent condition with no fire damage. He saw no way that that ring could have survived intact and in pristine condition if it was there during the fire. He believed that it was planted there. This fire was starting to get more mysterious the more the authorities looked into it. Investigators would learn that just months before the fire, Clarence had purchased several life insurance policies totaling over $1 million. They all named Geneva Roberts as the beneficiary. Clarence also told a friend that he had more than $100,000 in a Swiss bank account and even showed the friend the bank card that was tied to the account. During the autopsy, the coroner would make an interesting discovery. When the test results came back, it was discovered that the body in the fire had type AB blood. However, according to Clarence's Army medical records, he had type B blood. Was it just some sort of medical mix-up, or is it possible that it wasn't Clarence Roberts who burned up in the fire? There would be other discoveries that gave doubt to it being Clarence in the first fire. A tooth discovered near the body was thought to be a lower right second molar. Clarence Roberts' lower right second molar had been removed years prior. Clarence's cousin reported seeing him just 30 minutes before the fire wearing a blue shirt. The body found was wearing a brown plaid shirt. The cause of death was carbon monoxide poisoning, and when the bank repossessed Clarence's truck, they discovered holes in the exhaust system, apparently made by a hammer or similar instrument. Authorities would soon learn that on November 17th, the day before the fire, Clarence Roberts was spotted in a bar in nearby Morgantown, Indiana, befriending a vagrant. The man appeared to be around the same size and same age as Clarence. He told the vagrant that he needed some jobs done at his house, but did not appear to know the man's name. The man agreed to go with him. Witnesses said as the two men went out to Clarence's vehicle that the man collapsed from some unknown reason, possibly a seizure. Clarence said that he would take the man to the hospital. However, a check of hospitals within a 300-mile radius showed that no one matching the description was seen around that time. Years would go by and Clarence Roberts never resurfaced. By then, the authorities were confident enough that it wasn't Clarence Roberts who perished in the fire, so they convened a grand jury. They would indict him in 1975 for kidnapping and murder, and a worldwide manhunt was launched. So now there were two theories that emerged. One is that, despondent over his financial collapse, Clarence had killed himself, and his life insurance policies were put in place to take care of Geneva. The other, more sinister theory was that he murdered a vagrant in order to collect the insurance money for himself. Did Clarence hide in the shadows and watch his family's property burn, knowing that there was an unsuspecting victim in the flames? The Roberts family, as well as residents of Nashville, Indiana, seemed divided, as some were convinced that he committed suicide, while others thought that he was capable of murder. With her husband now dead, or at least missing, Geneva Roberts was left alone, going from rags to riches, then back to rags. She was forced to move into a much smaller home on the Roberts property on State Road 135. She would spend the next several years fighting the insurance companies tooth and nail to pay out on the approximately $1.2 million in policies that Clarence put in place shortly before the fire. She was repeatedly denied. Geneva Roberts would even try to get her husband declared legally dead. A prominent pathologist, Dr. John Pless, agreed with her. In 1978, after an examination of the evidence, he was able to prove to several others that it was in fact Clarence Roberts who died in the fire. Ultimately, though, the judge would not agree and cited insufficient evidence and refused to declare Clarence Roberts legally dead. Dejected and still destitute, Geneva Roberts would withdraw from society as well as friends and neighbors. She would become the main subject of small-town gossip in a town in which she was once revered. To make ends meet, Geneva Roberts would take a job in the kitchen of the local Howard Johnson's restaurant. The rumors would continue as shopkeepers said that they sold her large quantities of beer, even though she was diabetic and hardly ever drank. Other people would say that Geneva did not live alone. Neighbors would report seeing someone on the grounds of her home. Others reported seeing a man behind her residence. He would act strangely and never let anyone close. If approached, he would duck away and head back into the house. Law enforcement would even set up surveillance at the home. For 3 days and nights, they would photograph anyone that came around the home, but they would never see the man. They speculated that the mystery man was Clarence Roberts, and that he had now run out of places to hide and was back with his wife. A local reporter named Helen Ayres would strike up a friendship with Geneva Roberts. She would even visit Geneva at her home on no less than 4 occasions. However, Geneva always met her on the back porch and never invited her inside. Helen suspected that a man was living there with her. The reporter would talk to Clarence's sister, who lived in the adjacent yard. She would recount to her that she had heard Geneva talking to a man, but that it was not Clarence's voice. Geneva's reclusive and mysterious lifestyle would continue until the night of November 29, 1980, when this strange case would take an even more bizarre turn. There would be another fire in Nashville, Indiana on that night. At around 11:25 p.m. on Saturday night, Geneva Roberts' nephew Steve, who lived in front of her in a trailer, would call to report Geneva's residence on fire. By the time the firefighters arrived, it was already burning intensely. The house would be completely incinerated in the flames. As they sifted through the ashes, they would sadly find the body of 59-year-old Geneva Roberts, who had unfortunately perished in the flames. But when they kept looking, they would find something else in the rubble that shocked everyone. A second body would soon be discovered in the burned-out house. When the coroner, Dr. Pless, viewed the chest x-ray of the body, he could hardly believe what he saw. The chest x-ray was identical to the one that he had become very familiar with when he was trying to match the victim in the first fire to Clarence Roberts. Dr. Pless was now absolutely certain that it was the same x-ray. But this would create a lot of problems. It would mean that after 10 years earlier dying in a fire, that Clarence Roberts had once again died in a fire. Now Dr. Pless would have the unenviable task of telling everyone that Clarence was dead again and that in his medical opinion had been misidentified the first time. Geneva Roberts would be laid to rest at the David Cemetery in Brown County. Neighbors would talk about Geneva Roberts' life when interviewed about her death in the second fire. One said that Geneva came to her house on the morning of the fire. She tried to sell a wood sign that she'd made for their mailbox. The neighbors refused. They said that she acted normally. But another neighbor said Geneva was better off being dead because she was now at peace. They went on to say that Geneva lived in a place that was not fit to live in those last several years. She had no running water and would always have the blinds drawn. She had a vicious guard dog and claimed that people were spying on her and reading her mail. Geneva was scared and unhappy. As they investigated the second fire, firefighters determined that it was a clear-cut case of arson. Turpentine had been used to start the fire. Detectives followed burn patterns from Geneva's bed into the adjacent room where the victim's body was located, and then down a hallway and out the back door of the house. Because of that, authorities ruled that Geneva Roberts had been murdered. Investigators said that both victims in the fire had died from carbon monoxide and smoke inhalation. Both victims also had a substantial amount of alcohol in their system, with Geneva having a blood alcohol content of 0.3 and the second victim with a blood alcohol content of 0.2. As you can imagine, this revelation of not only the second body, but the arson, brought up so many questions. The most prevalent is who was the unknown victim in the second fire? If it was Clarence Roberts, then who was the victim in the first fire? Law enforcement and the coroner were both now certain that Clarence Roberts died in the second fire. However, the family members still seemed to think that Clarence died in the first fire. In a newspaper article around the time, it said that 2 of the Roberts sons went to the funeral home to pick up their mother's remains, but refused to claim the second victim as their father. However, another account said that one of their sons had instructed them to prepare both bodies from the second fire for burial. Geneva Roberts was laid to rest with a stone with only her name on it. The family was upset when a headstone was placed with the victim from the second fire, with Clarence Roberts' name on it. Carson Roberts, Clarence's brother, and the one that had co-owned the hardware shop with him, would weigh in on this mystery. He doesn't think that Clarence died in either fire. He believes that he could be alive somewhere today. He said that a male friend had been visiting Geneva in recent weeks, but insisted that it wasn't his missing brother. He surmised that it didn't make sense for him to be gone this long and to come back. He theorized if you wanted your family to collect a lot of insurance money at your death, you would not have burned your body beyond recognition. You would not want to leave any doubt about that body being yours, and someone went to a lot of trouble to disguise the identity of that body. There were some sightings of Clarence Roberts, and not just as Geneva's secret house guest. In 1978, Robert J. Hillenberg, who was an acquaintance of Clarence's, said that he saw him at a restaurant in Mexico in 1975. When Geneva was trying to have her husband declared dead, her attorney would even fly to Mexico to take a written deposition from him. There was even a supposed sighting of Clarence with a woman, which, not surprisingly, led to rumors of a possible affair. There would be an investigation into the second fire. Finally, in April of 1983, a grand jury was convened. They would ultimately conclude that Geneva Roberts fell asleep or was unconscious due to alcohol consumption before the fire started. They believed that Clarence, wanting to set the house on fire, spread turpentine around the floor. He apparently passed out before he could escape when a wood stove ignited due to the turpentine fumes, killing both of them. Early on, there was a person mentioned who could be a possible match to the victim in the first fire. He was a 38-year-old drifter from Kentucky named James Woodrow Hatcher, who vanished in 1968, but his family wouldn't report him missing until 1970. However, when they compared his x-rays to x-rays of the victim in the first fire, they were not a match. In December of 1988, close to 20 years after this mystery began, Unsolved Mysteries would take a crack at figuring this complex case out. They would spend about a week filming, even burning a couple of old buildings for the reenactment of the two fires. They would also interview Clarence's family members and people from the community. Some thought Clarence died in the first fire, some thought he died in the second fire, and others thought he was still alive. Helen Ayres, the reporter who befriended Geneva Roberts, has written a book about the case titled Murder, Relatively Speaking. She has done a tremendous amount of work on this mystery. On the Brown County Souvenir website, there was some information from the book. Helen recounted that after the second fire, an EMT came to her car and he told her the second victim was a 42-year-old male. If true, this would contradict the belief that Clarence Roberts was the male victim, as he would have been 68 at the time of the second fire. It was also mentioned that several weeks after Unsolved Mysteries completed filming in Nashville, that Clarence and Geneva Roberts' grandson came to Ayres' office. He showed her the Masonic ring that was found under the victim of the first fire. Even though the ring had never been ID'd publicly as belonging to Clarence Roberts, the young teen's parents had saved it and given it to him. You often hear one of the biggest mysteries in this story being the identity of the victim of the first fire. I was surprised to find a few newspaper articles that talk about who may have been the victim. These articles are more than 35 years old, and I'm unsure if anything has changed. But with the information they mentioned, it does certainly sound like the identity of the victim in the first fire is known. So let's talk about him now. In an article from 1990 in the Indianapolis Star, it talked about clues that may finally help to identify the victim thought to be murdered in the first fire. This man's family also believes that he was the first victim. His name is Clarence Thomas Hahn, and he had definitely lived a troubled life. Here are some of the details that make authorities think that Clarence Hahn died in the first fire. Hahn and Roberts were very similar in size and looks, some even saying that they looked like brothers. Hahn had a serious drinking problem and looked worn out, perhaps fitting the description of a vagrant. Hahn also suffered from seizures after his wife shot him in the head in 1965 during an argument. Those two things would match the mystery man that Clarence was with in the Morgantown bar. Due to decay, Hahn had no teeth, just like the victim, as there was only one tooth found, and it was near the body and could have been planted. He also wore plaid shirts frequently, which is what the first victim was wearing. The last time relatives saw Clarence Hahn on November 17th which incidentally was the same day that Clarence and the unknown man were seen in the bar, Hahn had been living in Indianapolis with his sister. He told her that he was headed to Brown County to see his friend Clarence and help him mow grass. That was the last time they ever heard from him. Hahn's ex-wife Ida also believes that her ex-husband died in that fire in 1970. She would recount their troubled life with a newspaper article. Hahn was a carpenter who did odd jobs and worked in mills. They lived in Indiana briefly and would go on to have 6 children. Clarence Hahn would continue to drink and be jailed for fighting. It was said that many members of the family were afraid of Hahn. The couple lived in El Dorado County, California, when in 1965, during a violent argument, Ida would shoot her husband in the head. It was apparently deemed justifiable because she was found not guilty of assault and battery. Shortly after her acquittal, Clarence Hahn was committed to a California mental hospital near San Francisco. After his release, he would reside in Indianapolis with his sister, until he left that day to go to Brown County to see his friend Clarence, that is. The Indianapolis newspaper would reach out to California hospitals in Sacramento and Placerville to check their records for Hahn's treatment from the surgery that he had there in 1965. The thought being to compare any possible x-rays that they may have to the victim from the first fire. Unfortunately, they didn't find any x-rays that would help Dr. Pless to medically confirm the match. However, Brown County investigator Anderson is convinced and would say to the paper, "Everything that we know about Hahn fits. In my mind, that was Hahn who died in the 1970 fire." Okay, now for my thoughts on this case. Honestly, I don't really have anything positive to say about Clarence Roberts. He may have started out a good man and no doubt worked hard with his brother to build his hardware business. But his desire for the good things got out of hand. When his living beyond his means caught up with him, he took it a step further, much further. Instead of just taking the hit and slowly rebuilding his income and reputation, as most people would do, he made a plan to defraud insurance companies to help get him and Geneva out of debt. He didn't just plan on defrauding insurance companies. Clarence Roberts was willing to put his family, not to mention his children, through the agony of mourning him and thinking that he ended his life. As if that wasn't bad enough, he then used an unwitting victim and caused the man to die in the fire. It doesn't even matter if he murdered him before the fire was set. Clarence made sure that his body would be in the barn, dead or alive, and then apparently set the fire, which is murder. So Clarence Roberts' reputation and love of money was certainly more important to him than a human life and the grief of his loved ones. It is understandable that he would want to leave his wife with some money to meet her needs after he was gone. But Clarence wasn't really gone. He was hiding like a coward. I really have no sympathy for Geneva Roberts. A lot of people may disagree with me, but I believe she knew everything that was going on from the beginning. I believe it was a plan formulated by Clarence and Geneva to take out a bunch of life insurance policies and then fake his death in a fire. Geneva didn't have time to mourn her husband because he wasn't dead. Plus, she was too busy going to court to try to get all the money that she felt she had coming to her. I do think that the mystery house guest was her husband Clarence. By all accounts, Geneva Roberts was a widow, so it wouldn't have exactly been scandalous if she was seeing someone new, so why would she take such great pains to hide whoever it was that was living with her? Unless it was her dead husband, of course. I believe that Clarence had run out of money and simply out of necessity had to move back in with her while she then apparently supported him. I think that Clarence Hahn died in the first fire. The case for it being him is compelling. The clothing he wore matched what Hahn would often wear. He had no tooth, and only one tooth was found near the body. I will add that they specify which tooth it was and say that Clarence Roberts had that tooth removed years prior. That made me wonder if, for whatever reason, Clarence kept that tooth that was pulled and planted it near the body. More compelling facts are Hahn's drinking problem and disheveled appearance that could make him appear to be a transient. His history of seizures because of his head injury, as someone witnessed the mystery man with Clarence Roberts having a seizure. The thing that clinched it for me is when Clarence Hahn left his sister's house the day before the fire and told her that he was going to Brown County to visit his friend Clarence and help him mow. There is no doubt in my mind that Clarence Roberts was the friend that he was referring to. I will say, though, that the second fire has me stumped, as there are several unknowns about it. I'm curious if Geneva knew about it and if it was a double suicide. I can honestly see a case for that. Think about it. Clarence and Geneva Roberts, now in their later years, were in a tough spot. If Clarence were discovered to be living in her home, he would be arrested for the outstanding warrants, but she would also go to jail for harboring him, fraud, and possibly other charges. We know by his past actions that the person that Clarence Roberts worried about the most was himself. Now he had put himself in a situation where there was no way to get out of it where he would not go to jail, unless of course he was dead. But I'm not 100% convinced that Geneva Roberts knew that the second fire was going to take place. Honestly, we will never know that. They had both been drinking heavily that night, and I wonder if that was so they could purposely pass out before the fire, or if that was a regular pattern with them. I'm also not positive that a third person didn't start the fire. I just mean that because it is uncertain how the fire could have been started by Clarence Roberts, given where he was found. I guess he could have orchestrated a situation where a fire would soon be started and then drank until he passed out. I really don't think it was foul play, though. I believe if a third person did start the fire, it was at Clarence Roberts' direction. I came across another case involving someone dying twice that I wanted to briefly talk about. It isn't as well known as Clarence Roberts, but it is certainly a sordid tale. Just a warning that there is brief mention of sexual crimes against children, but I will not give any specific details. Joe Benson was a 44-year-old retired Marine who was arrested in the small town of Hurricane, Utah. He was known to locals as Crazy Joe. He had dyed red hair and wore contact lenses to make his eyes blue. On Halloween of 1997, he was arrested and charged with sexually assaulting two of his daughters and a neighbor girl. But what would start out as a small-town sex scandal quickly grew into something even bigger and more sordid. When Joe Benson was fingerprinted, the authorities got a surprise. Joe Benson wasn't the accused molester's real name. His real name was Arthur Bennett. He had moved to the town of Hurricane 2 years ago with his ex-wife Amelia and their 3 daughters. The move came shortly after a camper trailer was found on the side of the road on fire in February of 1994 near Las Vegas, which was 150 miles from Hurricane. Inside the trailer, a badly burned body was found and was determined to be Arthur Bennett. The vehicle parked near the trailer also belonged to Arthur Bennett. Before the trailer fire, Arthur Bennett was stationed with the Marines in Yuma, Arizona. He had been going through some serious legal problems. Bennett was facing a court-martial after being accused of sexually abusing the child of a fellow Marine. There was also an investigation going on of a possible second incident in Okinawa, Japan. The body that was found in the trailer fire was burned beyond recognition. Its hands and feet had been burned off. Identification was nearly impossible. The death was ultimately listed as a suicide. It was thought that with an impending court-martial that Arthur Bennett had committed suicide. Bennett's family had the remains cremated and buried during a military ceremony in a Boulder City, Nevada cemetery. The Marines would pay out a $200,000 life insurance benefit, as well as pay out $2,600 a month in death benefits to his family. After his arrest on Halloween and the shocking revelation that Joe Benson was Arthur Bennett, who had not died in the trailer fire, he was held on $150,000 bond on 2 counts of rape of a child under 14 and 1 count of aggravated sexual abuse of a child. Those charges could each carry a life sentence. The county attorney said that he planned to amend the complaint to add 2 more young victims. These charges that caused the arrest on Halloween stemmed from when Bennett had volunteered to help build sets for the Hurricane High School's drama department, where 2 of his daughters attended. He was a hit with students, and he soon earned their trust. The inappropriate behavior started and escalated quickly and 4 months into his volunteering at the high school, rumors began to surface. Those would culminate in the arrest of Joe Benson in late October of 1997, which turned out to be Arthur Bennett using a false name. As far as who the victim was in the trailer fire, it was never determined. Authorities don't think they will ever know the identity. In 1998, Arthur Bennett pled no contest to 13 sex crime felonies involving 3 teenage girls, 2 of which were his daughters. He would still face a court-martial for desertion, arson, insurance fraud, theft, and first-degree murder charges for the body left in the trailer. However, those charges would never go to trial. On July 12, 1999, just 2 days before his court-martial, 45-year-old Arthur Bennett was found hanging in his cell in the county jail. Suicide was determined as the cause of death. The family would refuse to claim his remains, citing that they buried him once, they weren't going to bury him again. But burying their loved one for a second time would be the least of their concerns. Arthur Bennett's family, his ex-wife, mother, and 2 brothers, would now face federal conspiracy charges in connection with the insurance case, since they knew he wasn't really dead. The family members would say that Bennett told them that he was a government operative being used to kill drug lords. He also said that the military faked his death in 1994 in order to provide him with a new identity. More details would come out during the conspiracy trial as to how Arthur Bennett faked his own death. He had asked and was granted a 3-week leave before his court-martial to get his affairs in order. In January of 1994, he drove his truck and took possession of a 30-year-old camp trailer, which he towed to Las Vegas where his family lived. He then parked the trailer near Lake Mead. He then met with his ex-wife, mother, and brothers to finalize plans for his staged suicide and to go over each of the family members' roles in it. Late that night, there would be an explosion, and on February 4th, the last day of Bennett's leave, his trailer was discovered blown apart and burned down to the wheels. Among the ruins was a human skeleton sprawled next to a propane bottle found inside the trailer. The lid to the bottle had been left open. Behind the trailer, authorities would find a broken vodka bottle, stocking cap, and a stun gun. That same morning, as authorities were investigating the fire, Arthur Bennett would phone his sister and simply say, "It's done, I'm on my way." In December of 2000, Arthur's ex-wife, Amelia Bennett, would plead guilty to concealing her knowledge of a felony without admitting that she participated in it. In April of 2001, Bennett's mother and 2 brothers were found guilty of conspiracy to defraud the government for collecting $300,000 in benefits. I did search but could not find a mention of what their exact sentence was. Well, the first thing that comes to mind about Arthur Bennett and his story is good riddance. There honestly wasn't one positive thing said about him in all of the articles. He's a child rapist, even raping his own daughter repeatedly. When he was caught, he fakes his death, presumably murders someone to pass as him, then proceeds to bilk the government, with the help of his family, out of $300,000. Everything was getting ready to catch up with him, and not having the guts to face his accusers or deal with the punishment, he took his own life. I'm glad the family was held accountable for their part, and once again, the best thing that I can say about Arthur Bennett is good riddance. I will note that there was apparently a Dateline episode made about Arthur Bennett. I wasn't able to find it as it was back during season 8, I believe, but just letting you guys know in case anybody wants to try to track it down and watch it. Pseudocide is the act of staging your own death. Clarence Roberts and Arthur Bennett both set fires to fake their death. They let innocent people die in them as a perceived solution to bad things that were happening in their lives. Arthur Bennett's crimes were horrific, and he deserved to at least rot in jail for the rest of his miserable life for them. He couldn't face his punishment, so he took the quick way out. Clarence Roberts couldn't handle the financial ruin he was facing with all of Nashville, Indiana watching. Instead, he wanted the town and his own family to mourn him while he cashed in on fraudulent insurance policies and started over somewhere new. Both of their plans would fall through, which is why we're talking about them today. It has been said that we all die twice. once when we simply cease to be, and the next when we are forgotten. In some ways, Clarence Roberts died twice on this earth. After the first fire in 1970, when the majority of his family mourned him, and the second time in 1980, when it appears that he did actually die. But as convoluted as this story is, with all the twists and turns, Clarence Roberts' story will not soon be forgotten. This story is stranger than fiction, and after more than 45 years, he still lives on as the man who died twice. That concludes my podcast on Clarence Roberts. If you enjoyed it, please leave me a rating or review where you listen to your podcast. You can find me on Amazon Music, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, iHeartRadio, YouTube, and YouTube Music. My website is Lost and Found Blogs, where you can read all of my original articles, as well as links to my most recent podcasts. I have social media pages under that name on Facebook, X, and Instagram. I also have a Patreon channel under Lost and Found Podcast with many podcasts on lesser-known cases that you should check out. You can reach me via email at lostandfoundpodcast@yahoo. And remember that cold cases stay cold because their story stops getting told.